Good morning. It's Monday, August 26th. The multi-front war in the Middle East is now 325 days old. I'm Jonathan Schanzer, Senior Vice President for Research at Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Welcome back yet again to the FDD Morning Brief. It was a nutty weekend. I don't know where you guys were, but I was having a pleasant dinner in Washington, D.C. on Saturday night when my phone just about melted down. The Israelis carried out a preemptive strike to prevent Hisbah from firing missiles deep into Israel. A short battle erupted after that, and then just like that, we are back to the status quo. But it may not be the status quo. It rarely is. Of course, you know that because you tune in to the FDD Morning Brief every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So let's get down to business. Our guest this morning is Ehud Yaari. I've known Ehud for some years, but I've followed his work for far longer. He is a veteran reporter in Israel. He works for Channel 12. Ehud has always seemed to have great scoops, not to mention remarkable insights into the Arab world. Here in Washington, Ehud is affiliated with the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. We'll speak to him in just a few minutes here on the FDD Morning Brief. We all know what happened Saturday night. Israeli intelligence sniffed out a major Hezbollah attack. The IDF bombed the rockets before they could be fired. Okay, but now what? First, the good news. The Mossad has its mojo back. The Fuad Shukr assassination in Lebanon, the Ismail Haniyeh assassination in Iran, the central bank hack in Iran, and the thwarting of a major Hezbollah attack. Impressive all around, and the Israeli people are chuffed to see it. But don't uncork the champagne. War still looms in northern Israel. After launching nearly 7,000 attacks since October 8th, Hezbollah has robbed 100,000 Israelis of their homes in the north, and the government still does not have answers. And don't forget the hostages. Israel simply cannot stop fighting until they are returned. Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar knows this. That's why he rejects every deal he's offered. He wants a regional war. Iran probably wants that war too. Israel has difficult choices ahead. It can remain locked in a costly and lengthy war of attrition, which runs counter to the doctrine of the IDF, or Israel can get off the fence and make some consequential decisions. Making consequential decisions is often how wars are won, but make the wrong decision and, well, there could be consequences too. I'd place my bet on things shaking the right way so long as the Mossad is back to business as usual, but this thing is fluid. Too fluid for my liking, and I suspect we'll get some clarity soon, so stay tuned. Now for your headlines. Headline 1. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Charles C.Q. Brown, made an unannounced trip to the Middle East over the weekend. He arrived in Jordan on Saturday. Shortly before landing, General Brown told Reuters that he planned to discuss ways to deter escalation and avoid broader conflict. Interestingly, rather than deter escalation, within hours of his arrival, the Northern Front went bonkers. By Sunday, Brown was in Egypt, where he met with Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. Sisi is apparently concerned about a new front in the north and emphasized the need to preserve Lebanon's stability and sovereignty. Meantime, I didn't see one word about Egypt's double dealing along the Philadelphia corridor, where the regime in Cairo appears to have facilitated Hamas tunnels for years. At some point, this thing is going to have to get some airtime. Headline 2, the Israelis aren't the only ones taking out terrorists these days. On Friday, American forces eliminated Abu Abdulrahman al-Maki in northwest Syria. Al-Maki was a senior leader of the al-Qaeda affiliate group called Haras al-Din. U.S. Central Command said al-Maki was eliminated in a targeted kinetic strike. A local reportedly witnessed 2 missiles hitting his motorcycle. According to CENTCOM, al-Maki was responsible for overseeing his group's terrorist operations from Syria. CENTCOM Commander General Michael Eric Kuroa said that the U.S. remains committed to defeating terrorists in the region. Everything old is new again. And headline 3, after a Houthi attack, an environmental crisis is emerging in the Red Sea. It started last week. The Iran-backed Houthi rebels targeted a Greek-flagged oil tanker that was carrying 150,000 tons of crude oil. The attack caused the ship's engine to lose power. A fire then broke out on board. Thankfully, the crew was able to extinguish the fire. The crew evacuated, and the tanker found a safe place to dock. All good, right? Except no, not right. On Saturday, State Department spokesman Matthew Miller warned that the Houthis appear determined to sink the tanker and drown its cargo. Talk about a massive environmental hazard. 1 million barrels of oil spilling into the Red Sea per day would be 4 times the size of the Exxon Valdez oil spill near Alaska that made headlines in 1989. I'm just waiting for those well-meaning environmental groups to come out and criticize the Houthis, but I'm not holding my breath. Okay, it's time now for my interview with Ehud Yaari. As I mentioned, he is a fellow at the Washington Institute here in Washington. He is one of my all-time favorite journalists in Israel. I watched him often when I was a grad student, struggling to understand the news in Hebrew back in the late 1990s. Today, when I watch him on TV, I understand him a lot better. But for the sake of simplicity, we're going to have him speak to us in English today. I've caught up with him just a short while ago here on the FDD Morning Brief. Welcome, Ehud Yaari.
Pleasure being here.
Okay, let's start with the series of impressive strikes carried out by Israel over the last few weeks. Would you agree that the Mossad has seemed to regain its footing, and do you think we're likely to see more of these targeted attacks as the war drags on?
Well, I think it was more a work which was carried out by the Directorate of Military Intelligence through 8200 unit. The Israelis have been mapping the depots of Hisbah in South Lebanon and beyond the Litani River for many years. What happened was that this preemptive strike, very massive, but still very careful, eliminated close to 6,000 mainly short-range Katyushas, rockets that Hezbollah uses against the Israeli settlements and bases in the north. It didn't touch the ballistic missiles, especially those that are equipped with the precision kits, because Hezbollah didn't seem, and Nasrallah said it explicitly last night, Hezbollah did not mean to use them. So the Israelis have disrupted most parts of the attack plan of Hezbollah. They were still able to lob 300 odd Katyusha rockets and drones to northern Israel, but the attack on the installations north of Tel Aviv were foiled. None of the drones reached even the vicinity.
Interesting, though, that they still were able to take out a number of the rocket launchers and a number of other, I guess, key pieces of infrastructure for future attacks. At least that's what I'm hearing. So do you think that there's any long-term impact on this attack, or was it just simply thwarting the one attack that they had planned?
I think that the Hezbollah's capabilities to keep hitting Israel, as they were doing for the past 11 months, were significantly reduced by this attack. They have less available launchers and Katyusha rockets. And one has to keep in mind, none of the Hezbollah, Jonathan, none of the Hezbollah commanders is in the south anymore. They are all in the bunkers up north, just like Yahya Sinwar in Gaza. So they are losing capabilities. They are being pushed further and further back. I would say the Hezbollah forces are now 20 kilometers in most sectors north of the Israeli border. And they have been losing both commanders and field fighters. So they have reduced capabilities. Now they will have problem shipping more Katyushas to the south, but they will do it.
So interesting. I mean, a couple of questions then. I mean, first of all, we keep hearing that Israel wants Israel to withdraw north of Hezbollah to withdraw north of the Litani. So if they've already largely withdrawn north of the Litani, then what is Israel's goal here? And then I think beyond that, I guess a question for you is, what is the Hezbollah calculus? I mean, we keep hearing that they don't want a wider war. Now we see that they've withdrawn north, as you just suggest. And yet we continue to see the group wage war against Israel. 6,700 attacks is a serious campaign. So how are we to understand Israel's goals and Hezbollah's goals in this conflict?
I think that Israel has managed, the IDF has managed to push Hezbollah back, but I don't think a political settlement, a set of arrangements brokered by Amos Hochstein, by the US envoy, is in sight. What I think is Hezbollah is interested in keeping fluctuating levels of attrition, keeping 100,000 Israelis as displaced. In my home village, Metula, the northernmost point of Israel, 45 to 50% of all houses were burned down, destroyed, or at least are damaged. That's huge. And how do you get people back? I think Israel will have to employ a military threat, credible, with the intention, with the demonstration of a willingness to employ it, in order to get Hezbollah keep away from the border and refrain from replenishing their underground depots in the south. Thinking about Metula, my home village is only 2.4 kilometers from the Litani River. And they are employing anti-tank missiles that can fire to a range of 10 kilometers and probably a little more. So we will need to have a credible military threat in place in order to allow people to go back to and repair their homes. I don't believe, I hope I'm wrong, I don't believe Mr. Hochstein has any chance of brokering a deal, a permanent deal between Israel and Hezbollah.
I tend to agree. I think he keeps doing the same thing and he keeps getting the same results, which obviously is not what we're looking for. But let me switch gears for a minute. I want to ask you about Hamas. I tend to think that the group is near defeat, and yet Yahya Sinwar doesn't want to end this thing. What is his strategy here? Is it just that he wants to see a bigger war and that he keeps fighting so that there is a regional war that breaks out with Iran and Hezbollah? Is that ultimately what he looks for, just destruction across the board?
Sinwar knows there will most probably not be a regional war. Sinwar, and I'm speaking information, not speculation, feels for many months betrayed by Iran and Hezbollah. He was led to believe that there will be a full-blown second and third front, etc. It didn't happen. So there are piles of tensions between them. What Sinwar wants is one thing. He wants an end to the war. And then he's willing to give the hostages. Short of that, he has no interest because he wants to be surrounded by some of the hostages that are still alive, not too many, unfortunately. So this is the whole issue here. Does he get a ceasefire guaranteed by the mediators, including the US, Qatar, Egypt? Or if not, he has no interest in a temporary ceasefire, after which the IDF will keep pursuing him. And Israel will keep pursuing him and his people. So he prefers the present situation to a deal that is on the table now. And what they are doing is the remnants, the minority of the remnants of the Hamas battalions are in civilian clothes amongst the displaced population in the tent cities, coming out of there, planting an explosive charge, sniping, etc., and going back. He can stay on this course for a very long time.
Well, I'd like to see that part of the war end, and I do think we're getting closer, but I think you're right that that kind of tactic is sustainable for a very long time. Switching gears again, I know you track a lot of activity in the surrounding Arab and Muslim states. What are you watching that others aren't? You always seem to have interesting scoops about the rest of the Arab world. I mean, I'm wondering, is Syria going to become a bigger problem? Sudan, I hear that that country is increasingly back under the influence of Iran. Or are there other countries in the region that you're watching that you think are either interesting or of concern?
Well, I'll do a few quick bullets. I think there is a lot that can be done in Syria, a lot, without going to the details now, provided the US maintains its very modest presence in northeastern Syria and on the Jordanian border. Jordan, personally, I'm watching very carefully because I am convinced that Jordan is the next target for the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, undermining the Hashemite regime, smuggling weapons, together with drugs, of course, etc., trying to open up a front along Israel's eastern border. And third, I would mention, on the Red Sea, Eritrea. It's not an Arab country, half the population Muslim. The Iranians are trying to drag the dictator of Eritrea, Isaias Afewerki. Years ago, my friend, he was treated in Israeli hospitals for his chronic malaria. But the Iranians are trying to drag Eritrea. And as an alternative, they are trying to build an option in Sudan. But I understand from the Sudanese government, the leadership, that they have no intention of going that way again. But I would say these are the three focal points. And of course, the fate, I believe, the fate of the Middle East, the future course of the region will be decided in a different country. The name is Iraq. I think if the Iranians manage to turn Iraq into a client state and milk its energy riches, then it's a new ballgame, both for the Levant and for the Gulf states.
Tend to agree on Iraq. I did not have Eritrea on my bingo card this morning. That's an interesting one that I'm going to have to look into. So thank you for flagging that. Last question for you here. What about the Israeli government? I'm not fishing for criticism or compliments at this point. I'm just asking, do we see a strategy coming together here, or is this still a war cabinet that is reacting? It's not proactive, at least in my view. Are we starting to see a war strategy come together after 10, 11 months?
I don't think so. I think Mr. Netanyahu is not in a hurry anywhere. And he feels pretty relaxed lately because he's improving a bit in the polls. At least his decline has been, for the time being, arrested. The major issue before the Israeli government is, in my humble opinion, the following. Do we do something about Iran? Or we let the Iranians play their proxies against us whichever way they want? Iran is exposed. Iran cannot really defend itself. I'll give an example. If Israel threatens Harg Island at the top of the Persian Gulf, where from 90% of Iranian oil exports, mainly to China, go from, that would make the Iranian leadership recalculate and think about it again. But as long as Iran is using the proxies and is not threatened itself, and if we do something in Tehran is to kill Mr. Haniya, then I don't see how the Iranians are going to be convinced to stop. Because to the best of my understanding, the new president of Iran, Pezeshkian, and his foreign minister, Arakchi, believe that they can negotiate some arrangements with the United States without stepping down from their policy of trying to build a ring of fire and missiles, etc., around Israel.
I tend to think that you're right. I do believe that the Israelis have been warned not to threaten economic targets like Karg Island. And I think that is probably ultimately the leverage that Israel is going to need. But I tend to agree. I want to thank you, Ehud Yaari. Really terrific analysis. Thank you for joining the FDD Morning Brief.
Welcome. Good day.
All right, here's what FDD has on tap for you today. FDD's David Daoud has a piece in Haaretz that questions whether a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas would also neutralize the Hezbollah threat. A ceasefire under current conditions could lead Nasrallah to boast that he got away with driving more than 100,000 Israelis from their homes along the Lebanese border. He could then say that he also succeeded through a ceasefire to keep Israel out of southern Lebanon. It's a piece worth reading, if only to question conventional wisdom. FDD's Seth Frantzman has a new piece in the Jewish Chronicle. He warns that Israel must not be drawn into a war of attrition. A little late for that, but he notes that Iran really should not dictate the tempo. The regime has kept the entire Middle East on edge for a month. Seth notes, maybe actually more than that. Seth notes that the waiting game is likely to continue even after this past weekend. And of course, that is not good for Israel, the U.S., or our other Arab allies. And finally, FDD's Ivana Stradner has a piece in the New York Sun about a recent UN-backed global cybercrime treaty initiated by Russia and supported by the government in Beijing. This odd agreement, as you might guess, provides a pretext for authoritarian states to censor free speech and implement global surveillance. Ivana warns against allowing Moscow and Beijing, not to mention Iran, to use the UN as a tool for global censorship under the guise of international law. All right, that's going to do it for today. Read our expert analysis on our website, fdd.org. Read our quick takes on X at FDD. And support our work with a tax-deductible donation at fdd.org/invest. Tune in Wednesday for another episode of the FDD Morning Brief. We'll talk to Israeli analyst Asaf Orion from the think tank INSS. Asaf is visiting Washington for the summer, so I'm going to force him to wake up early with us. Cruel and unusual punishment, I know. But until then, I'm Jonathan Schanzer, signing off for FDD.